Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the Airbus Beginners Tutorial Series. The aim of this series is to help get you in the air in the default Airbus A320 within Microsoft Flight Simulator and give you the required knowledge to simulate a flight from A to B within the sim. As the name would suggest, this series is very much aimed at people who are new to the Airbus, so we're not looking to learn every single system and procedure in minute detail. That being said, we will still try and follow real-world Airbus procedures as closely as possible. If you are looking for something a little bit more in-depth and a little bit more realistic, then please check out my other tutorial series on the channel, my Airbus Procedures tutorial series. Anyway, now let's head to the flight deck of the A320 and begin the lesson. So, welcome back to the flight deck of the default A320. If you remember in the last part of the series, we're now at the holding point for runway 27 at East Midlands. We're all ready to go, the aircraft is set for the departure. Just a few things before we enter the runway. We'll turn the weather radar on. Strobe lights can go on. Taxi lights on. And the nose wheel light to take off. We'll check that it is clear on final. There's no aircraft trying to land. Park brake is off. So we're lined up on the centre line, we'll just bring the aircraft to a stop briefly. Park brake is on. Just before we carry out the takeoff we'll brief it, otherwise things are going to get quite busy in the next phase of the flight. So for the takeoff, initially we'll set 50% N1 and wait for the engines to spool up and stabilise. Once they're stabilised, today it will be a toga takeoff or a max power takeoff. So we'll bring the thrust levers all the way up to the toga detent. As we do that, we should see some modes come up on the FMA. So we'll call out the modes. We'll let the aircraft accelerate up to V1. We'll call V1 at the V1 mark on the PFD, and then at rotate we'll pull back on the side stick, pitching the aircraft up to 15 degrees initially, and then following the flight directives shortly thereafter. Once we have positive climb, we'll call for the gear up, and then we'll insert the autopilot and allow the autopilot to fly the rest of the departure. At 1500 feet we should see lever climb flash up on the FMA. That's a prompt for us to bring the thrust levers from the toga detent back to the climb detent. The aircraft will then begin to accelerate up to 250 knots. As the aircraft accelerates we'll pass a green S on the speed tape of the PFD. Once we pass the green S we'll retract the flaps to 0. The aircraft will then accelerate up to its normal cruise speed and continue the climb up to cruise altitude. Just before we start the takeoff I would like to point out that the default A320 is still quite buggy in this respect, so we'll probably have to manually intervene with the autopilot and perhaps retract the flaps early as well to prevent a flap overspeed. Anyway, we're all ready, so park brake is off. We'll set the white donut above the 5 on the N1 gauge, that's 50% N1. Wait for the engines to stabilise. And we'll now set toga on the thrust levers. So that's man toga, SRS runway, auto thrust blue. Thrust is set. That's 100 knots. V1 rotates, so pulling back on the side stick, pitching the aircraft up to 15 degrees initially, and now following the flight directives, positive climb, gear up.
5289, contact Manchester Center on 118.775.
We'll get rid of him.
118. 18.775 for blue sign to
So that's climb nav, there's lever climb, bring the thrust levers back to the climb detent. So thrust climb, climb, nav, autopilot 1. We'll retract the flaps now, otherwise we'll probably get a flaps overspeed. This is flap 0. And you can see we're currently going to level off at 5,000 feet. We'll set our cruise altitude now. So that's thrust climb, climb, and we have flight level 350 blue. Anyway, aircraft should maintain 250 knots until passing 10,000 feet, and then we'll accelerate up to our cruising speed. And now that the flaps are retracted, we can turn the runway turn-off lights and the nose wheel steering light off, disarm the spoilers, passing through 10,000 feet. As I say, the aircraft will now accelerate up to 320 knots, and we can turn the landing lights off. And now we've reached 320 knots, the aircraft again climbing all the way up to flight level 350. So that's pretty much the departure process complete. The aircraft will now continue its climb up to our cruising altitude for today. So we'll stop the video here and we'll come back in part 5 of the series for the cruise section of the flight, where we'll look at the autopilot and the MCDU in a little bit more depth. So I do hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and found it informative. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. That really helps the channel to grow, and I really appreciate the support. If you have any comments or questions for me, please leave them down in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. But for now, thanks very much, and I'll see you all again soon.